Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Kathy Waller. I am a U of R grad, class of 1980 and class of 83 with the Simon School. I'm also on the Board of Trustees for the university. As you all are aware, this speaker series was inspired by Jerry Gardner. He's also U of R graduate, classes of 1958 and 65, and he's a life trustee for the college. Jerry recruited me, and he recruited Carl Grant, who is a class of 1990 graduate and who is also serving as the Atlanta Alumni Network leader. He recruited us to work with him on this speaker series. So we wanted to better understand systemic racism and to know how it not only manifests itself in Atlanta, in our community, but we wanted to learn more about the people and the organizations who work to eliminate that systemic racism and who work to address the impact that it has on the daily lives of the people of our community. So tonight's program, we will discuss Achieve Atlanta. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Tina Fernandez to this audience. I am fortunate to be on the board of Achieve Atlanta, and I work with Tina and her team. Tina is passionate about ensuring every student that she encounters has the opportunity to get a great education. If you Google her, you will see a statement that explains that Tina goes to work every day because she has experienced firsthand the transformative power that a college degree can have. So she is the founding CEO of Achieve Atlanta, and Achieve Atlanta's mission is to ensure that every student can access, afford, and earn a post-secondary degree. Now, prior to her role with Achieve Atlanta, Tina was a partner at Bellwether Education Partners and provided consulting services to education organizations across the US. She also served as a clinical professor at the University of Texas School of Law, and she worked as a managing director of alumni engagement for Teach America and as an attorney with Fulbright and Jaworski, LLP. And then as a Teach for America bilingual elementary teacher in the South Bronx. She serves on the boards of TNP, formerly the New Teacher Project, whose mission is to ensure that poor and minority students get equal access to effective teachers. She's on the board of Bellwether and Latinos for Education, and she serves on the board of NCAN, whose mission is to build, strengthen, and empower communities and stakeholders to close equity gaps in post-secondary attainment for all students. She is a Para-Aspen Fellow, which I had never heard of before, and a moderator for the Aspen Global Network. The Para Fellowship seeks to strengthen and sustain a diverse community of high integrity, values-driven leaders who are reimagining public education. Through the fellowship, they aim to identify exceptional leaders who can transform the educational system for the better. She earned her JD from Columbia and her MBA, her BA from Harvard. Now, Tina is truly an expert in this space. And the future of our high school students in our community is much brighter because Tina is on their side. She is a powerful advocate for students. And the Board of Achieve Atlanta knows we are very, very lucky to have her. So Tina, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Kathy. And that was quite an introduction. I'm honored to be here and just really excited to share about our organization and the work that we do.
Wonderful. So I'm going to let you start with a very open-ended question.
Yeah.
Right. So for our audience, please explain Achieve Atlanta. So the mission and what problem the organization was created to solve.
Yep. So back in 2014, I'll start with sort of the genesis of Achieve Atlanta. Back in 2014, a group of community leaders in Atlanta wanted to understand what was happening with Atlanta public school students with regards to post-secondary degree attainment. And so some leaders from the Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta, from Atlanta Public Schools, and from the Woodruff Foundation convened a working group and really just started to grapple with the question, what are we doing for our students and what's happening once they get out of high school? And so they commissioned a study. They hired a team of consultants who looked at publicly available data, what was going on in the state. And the consultants issued a report. And what that report highlighted was what everyone suspected, but now there was some data to it. And that was that at that point in time, only about 14% of Atlanta Public School high school students were projected to earn a post-secondary degree of any kind within 6 years of their high school graduation. So 14%. All right. So that's a staggering statistic. Sadly, it is not uncommon across urban districts across the United States. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why this is a problem, but I'll just share a few of them. One of them is that by all accounts, by the year 2025, which we're only 3 years away from, 65% of the jobs in the state of Georgia are going to require some sort of post-secondary credential. So the health of our economy, of our workforce, and of our population is really dependent on having the people who can fill those jobs and who are ready to enter the workforce. And so we weren't producing enough post-secondary graduates to be able to fill those jobs. Second is that Atlanta has one of the lowest rates of social mobility of any city in the entire country. And a lot of you might have already talked about this in some of your other sessions, but a group of economists led by Raj Chetty from the Opportunity Project studied this issue of social mobility. And what they found was that a child born into poverty in Atlanta only has a 4% chance of entering the highest income quintile in his or her lifetime. And so if you're born into poverty in Atlanta, the chances are that you're going to stay in poverty. And we all know this, right? Generational poverty is an issue in Atlanta. Atlanta also has the unfortunate distinction of being named one of the cities with the highest income inequality for the last 5 years out of the, I think it's the Brookings Institute. And so we have a real problem because on the one hand, we have a city that has a high concentration of Fortune 500 companies, of a really robust middle class and upper class. But on the other hand, we've got generational poverty for the people who are born and raised and educated in this city. And so we needed to do something about that. And so this work group had the vision that they would create an organization that would be dedicated to addressing this particular problem. And that was the genesis of Achieve Atlanta. The Woodar Foundation at that point in time did something that they rarely do, which was commit to launching an organization and providing the seed funding to do that. So I was lucky enough to be hired as Achieve Atlanta's founding executive director. And when I came on board, I was given the charge to dramatically increase the number of Atlanta Public School students to earn a post-secondary degree. How we went about that was largely undesigned, and I was able to build a team to really tackle this problem. But a couple of things were true. One is that the supporters of this organization didn't want us to replicate services. So they didn't want to create another nonprofit that was going to work with individual students. As noble and necessary as that is, that wasn't what they wanted. What they wanted was an organization that was going to be able to bring all of the organizations working on this problem together to work cohesively and create an effective system, because this is a systems problem. And so that is effectively what Achieve Atlanta aims to do. So as you stated, our vision is that Atlanta will be a city where race and income no longer predict post-secondary success and upward mobility. And the way that we do that is we operate as an intermediary, which means that we work with Atlanta Public Schools, with several nonprofit providers, with colleges and universities, and soon with the business community to really bring all of these sectors together, think about the problem cohesively and comprehensively, and make sure that we're building the supports so that students can move through the pipeline so that they can get to college, that they can pay for college, and ultimately that they can finish college and earn a degree. And I'll use college as shorthand, but when I say college, I mean technical 2-year or a 4-year degree. And that is the work that we do at Achieve Atlanta. And I'm happy to go into details about how we do that work, but that's just a general overview of why we exist.
Okay. Now, you said something that struck me. So if 65% of the jobs will require, within next 3 years, right, a post-secondary degree, and I think about it, I'm not sure it's reasonable that 65% of the jobs really need to require a post-secondary degree. So, when you say you're going to work with businesses, are you working with businesses to really define what jobs really require a post-secondary degree, or how are you working with business? How are you planning to work with businesses?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Kathy. And so, it used to be in our country and in our economy that people could have family sustaining wages at, in lots of sectors without having to go to college, right? The threshold used to be a high school graduation, and that if you finished high school and you got a job in manufacturing or, in other industries, that you could support your family on those wages.
Right.
Sadly, that is not the case anymore. And there's lots of reasons for this. Your group talks about systemic racism, right? And I'll give you my own personal theory, right? Is that high school graduation used to be the bar. And we know that in the past, a lot of students of color, Black and brown students, were not earning a high school graduation. And so most of the, we had a majority white student population getting high school degrees, being able to go into the workforce. Well, we started to work on that issue, increase graduation rates, and now you've got more of the general population, right? More Black and brown students are graduating high school. Here in Atlanta, our high school graduation rate is in the 81, 82%. Across the country, that's been the big thing that we've been working on. But now the barrier to entry into the workforce is no longer high school, but it's college, and we have raised the bar. And so I often get, people saying, well, not everybody needs a college degree. Not everybody needs to go to college. Sadly, to get a living wage, now in this country, you do need to go to college. Right. So I think that what we are doing is we're working with the system that we have, and we do some policy efforts, and we try to engage in those conversations, but we know what the situation is now. And so we're trying to help our students succeed within the system that we have. But I think you've brought up a really important point, which is, why does every job need a college degree now? Why do you need a college degree? If you go to your local Starbucks, a lot of the students, a lot of the folks who are working behind the counter have college degrees, right? If you're going into an entry-level administrative position, you can't even compete for those jobs unless you have a college degree. And so I do think that there's a conversation to be had on the workforce side and on the sort of economic opportunity side about why are we setting the standard at a degree. And I think that the pendulum is starting to swing a little bit back because of the problems that workforce is having filling those positions. And so you've got some, I would say future-looking companies that are starting to offer their own trainings within their companies, or even subsidize credentials for their workers so that they can start to bring people in and train them to do the jobs that are available in their companies. But those companies are far and few between. And until we see more of the workforce changing their requirements, we're still left in a situation where to get a decent job in this country, you still have to have some sort of post-secondary credential.
So, and I do remember one of the things that Delta has announced, that they are going to have jobs that do not require a post-secondary degree. And so we need more companies to do that as well, right? To evaluate their positions to see which ones really need a post-secondary degree versus not, right? Right.
And in doing that, we also need to make sure that companies are offering job security and the types of training and credentials that can be transferable, so that if somebody wants to leave Delta and move into another position,
they still
can do that. Because one of the things that we talk about with, again, this is just sort of like the situation as it is now. In addition to being able to get a job, all of the data shows that people with post-secondary degrees have higher life expectancies. They have access to healthcare. They have lower unemployment rates. They make, in general, over $1 million more than their peers who don't have a post-secondary degree in their lifetime. And then even with COVID, those that were most vulnerable to some of the negative impacts of the pandemic were folks who didn't have a degree and who ended up, who are our essential workers having to go into work every day, while, other folks get to, like me, sit at home and, Zoom into work. So I just want to point that out because the economics is a big piece of it, but there are all these other well-being indicators that are also tied to this credential.
That's amazing. All of that, it's tied to whether you attain a post-secondary degree or not.
Yeah.
And that's frightening that
Yeah.
so many people are not obtaining those degrees. So, one of the things I understood about Achieve Atlanta when I was talking to you all about joining the board was that you all help students identify a college or the post where they can get this degree and be successful and thrive, right, in college. Yeah. How do you do that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of evidence to support how students can make strong choices around where they go to college. And typically, if you talk to a 17, 18-year-old and you say, where do you want to go to college? Many of them will say, the school down the street, because they've seen, they've seen it.
Right.
Or I want to go to X university because my cousin went there. Mm-hmm. Or, they've seen it on TV or they like the football team, right? So, we're talking about young people who are making decisions, the way most young people make decisions.
Right.
So what we try to do is really present information in a way that students and parents can make strong, informed choices. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that the evidence shows is that one of the most important factors is that a student pick a college that is a good academic match. And match is one of those terms that is used a lot in the college success space. A good academic match really comes down to just a couple of factors. What's your GPA? And what is your score on college entrance exams? So the ACT or the SAT. And if you look on the website of any college, they will tell you the average entering GPA is X, the average entering SAT, ACT is Y, and the majority of the student body are within those, those sort of averages. So students who have certain academic credentials, a good match is a school where they are falling right in line with those qualifications. What's interesting about the match phenomenon is that if a student overmatches, meaning let's say that I have a 1200 on my SAT, but I go to a school where the average SAT is 1300. What the research shows is that students who overmatch actually tend to perform just as well as the students within the group. But if a student undermatches, so if I have a 1200 on my SAT, but I go to a school that has an average SAT score of 900, I will perform worse if I undermatch. And that seems counterintuitive, right? You would think, well, if you go to an easier school, you're going to do better. That's actually not the case. And undermatching is a big problem. And we actually looked at the data, and for many APS students, a majority of them going to college up until recently were undermatching, meaning that they were going to schools where they had higher academic credentials than the school required. We don't really know why that is, but a couple of hypotheses. One is that schools with lower academic requirements tend to be underfunded. And when you don't have a big endowment, or you don't have the budget to have student support services, tutoring centers, perhaps even enough housing to house students on campus, then the students don't get the supports that they need to be successful. Whereas if you go to a school with high academic credentials, that usually has more resources and more ways to support students once they're in school. So we really try to help students find a good academic match so that they can narrow the list of choices and pick something, that's going to really help them be successful. We also look at fit, and that's very important. And when we look at fit, there's a couple of things we talk about. One is, can you afford the school? And so, we look at students, we work with predominantly low-income students. So we're looking at, what is the cost of attendance? And that includes tuition, room and board, books, fees. What access do you have to financial aid? How will you finance your education? So that's one fit factor. We also look at pre-pandemic things like, do you want to go to a big school? Do you want to go to a smaller school? Do you want to be in a city? or in a more rural environment. A lot of our students want to go to HBCUs, and some are in state or out of state. They want to be in the band. What are the extracurricular activities, right? So there's a whole bunch of social components that go into the fit category. But typically what we were finding is that students were thinking a lot about fit and not really thinking about match. And it's actually really important that you think about both.
Yeah.
This is a complicated calculation. And so a couple of years ago, we applied for and got a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to really work on this issue of match and fit. And working with the data team at APS and our data team, we actually created a platform that pulls all of the students' academic information into this platform. And then it runs an algorithm that then generates a list for students of schools that are within their match profile, and then provides them with information on the college, on all of these other fit factors. And we call it the Match and Fit List Builder. And it's been in use now for the last 2 years at APS. And every junior now generates a college list their junior year using the Match and Fit List Builder. And our hope is that more and more students will choose strong college options, because that will then increase their chances of persisting and completing. I know that was like a very wonky technical answer, but you know, I think it's important.
It made perfect sense to me, but maybe because I'm on the board, but it made perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
And you know, I guess my theory would be lowest common denominator, right? If a school isn't pushing you to be better than, you know, can be,
right,
you don't actually try to achieve it, right?
Right.
You don't force yourself to be more than you know, your expectations, right?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, I played tennis, and I was not great, but you know, I was on the team, and I found that when I played against people who were really good, I played up. And when I played with people who weren't very good, I played down. And I think it's kind of, there's something to that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that does, you know, kind of factor into what's happening.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, you know, most people will be asking themselves why, I mean, these schools have high school counselors who's supposed to be doing this for students and directing them to these, you know, think about this in the same way. So why is Achieve Atlanta necessary if you've got high school counselors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, and we had the same question, right? So when this whole study was done and we were looking at like, okay, what are the gaps? What are the things students need? And then what are the gaps? Mm-hmm. One of the things we found out was that across the state, the average ratio of counselor to students in public schools is one counselor for every 400 students. 400? Yes. And at some high schools, it's 500, right? So you've got these overworked, overtaxed high school counselors, and God bless them, right? Mm-hmm. And the counselor doesn't just do college advising. They also are the registrar. They're also dealing with crisis every day, right? Students who are losing family members, students who are food insecure, students who are homeless, you know, the whole gamut of issues, you know, that high need student population has. They're also proctoring exams. They're doing lunchroom duty. They're, you know, so, you know, you've got these counselors that are just really kind of like, they're given a job that's really impossible to do. And they, you know, they do amazing things. The other, but the reality is when you've got one counselor to 400 students, you're just not going to be able to give every student the attention that they need. Then you couple that with the fact that applying to college has become so much more complicated. And anyone who has sent a kid to college recently knows this. Just to fill out the FAFSA, which is a financial form that you've got to fill out to access federal grants, you know, you've got to be able to pull your taxes. You've got to, you know, navigate this online system that the IRS puts out. And we all know how complicated those things are. And then you've got to write your essays, and you've got to apply to college, and you've got to decide, you know, which school you're going to. So what we calculated was that under the normal circumstance, a counselor could give a senior 15 minutes of college advising the entire year. 15 minutes isn't enough to, you know, properly introduce yourself. So we knew that we had to fill that gap. And we hope, you know, and continue to join with advocates who are advocating for more funding for schools to increase our counseling, you know, personnel at high schools. But until then, we had to fill this gap. And so we partnered with an organization called the College Advising Corps. They're a national organization. And what they do is they recruit recent college graduates. They train them on all of the intricacies of applying to college. And then they place the college counselors in under-resourced schools for 2 years. And the CAC advisors are just out of college. The only thing that they do is college advising. And so we fund the college advising corps and have placed 27 college advisors across all the high schools at APS. And have, in doing that, been able to reduce the ratio now to 1 to 100. And the typical private school, the ratio is 1 to 50. So we're not quite there yet. Some of our smaller schools, we're getting closer, but we're at least getting closer. And then using technology and things like the match and fit list builder, we're able to do things so that when the student does get in front of the counselor, they can have a more robust conversation versus, just kind of going through lists of colleges and trying to figure out which ones they want to apply to.
Wow. I knew that a job of a college counselor wasn't the best, but dang.
Yeah,
So that is an impossible job.
It's an impossible job. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So which direction I want to go in? So you've got a student and you're working with a student, and how do you know a 2-year versus a 4-year?
Yeah, it's a great question. So some of the conversations that our advisors have with students are, you sort of get to know them. And, one of them is, what do you think you're interested in, right? What do you think you want to do when you, are working or when you're grown up? And you start to have those conversations. So some of that will inform whether or not a student goes to a 4-year or a 2-year.
Okay.
And then when you're talking about the 2-year, you've got your community college. Here in Georgia, they're called access colleges, 2-year colleges. And then you've got your technical college. And those are very different, right? So a student who says, I want to be an esthetician, I want to work in a beauty salon, I want to be a mechanic, I want to be a chef. Those are technical skills and jobs that you would go to a technical college for. And so, and a lot of times students get exposure to some of those jobs in high school. So there is the CTAE department, which is Career and Technical, it stands Career Technical Advisory, something along those lines. And in Atlanta Public Schools, students have the opportunity to do dual enrollment, where they can enroll in classes at Atlanta Technical College, which is the technical college that's closest to APS, and start to take some of those classes and actually earn credits. And so students who want to go the technical route typically know in high school that that's what they want to do. And so when they talk to their advisor, there's a certain way that you apply to the technical college and do that track. And a lot of times with technical certificates and diplomas, it might not even be 2 years. It could be a 6-month program, a year program. A lot of times students who want to be dental hygienists or nurses can start in a technical college and then, go on to a degree program if they want to do that later on. What the 2-year colleges, which is, what people think of as junior colleges, community colleges, a lot of times students are choosing to go to those schools not because they can't afford a 4-year institution, because they waited too late to apply, because a lot of times the 2-year schools have just kind of, you can apply at any point, rolling admissions.
Okay.
They're called access institutions because you don't have to have a qualifying ACT or SAT to go to one of those institutions.
Oh, okay.
And so what we found was that before we really started doing the work at APS, a lot of our students were not taking the SAT or ACT until the fall of their senior year, which is really too late. Because if they didn't take it, then they didn't have a score and they couldn't even go to a 4-year college. Or if they took it and didn't score high enough, they weren't eligible. And so they went into the 2-year track. And so a lot of times, it was kind of a default option. Now we want to make sure that those options are more intentional, right? And so we actually, a couple of years ago, instituted something called SAT in the School Day, where we partnered with the College Board and APS, and Achieve Atlanta funds the SAT for every single student they take it their junior year in school during the school day. And as a result of giving the test during the school day, we removed all the barriers that students had to taking the test. They don't need transportation. They don't need to get fee waivers so that they, because a lot of our students can't afford to pay for the SAT. And they can go to school, they know it's coming, they take it there. So now every student junior year takes the SAT and has a score on file, which has really helped, again, remove the barriers. Now what we're finding is that the students who go to a 2-year school, maybe they still needed that extra support, or they didn't get the score that they needed, or financial issues are a real barrier. But now we are fortunate enough to have 2-year institutions that are partnered with 4-year schools so that they can create a pathway. So a student can start at Georgia Perimeter College, which is now connected to Georgia State. And they can start there. It's a commuter school. They can earn their, their basics and their credits. And then they can transfer or continue their education if they decide to on a 4-year path at Georgia State. And we really are big fans of these pipeline programs because the student can see that they can continue on with their education if they want to. And you've got the supports of a research institution tied to a 2-year state college. And it just creates better outcomes for the students.
So when you say a student needs a post-secondary degree to get a job, 65% of the jobs around here, then that 2-year degree, does that count or no? Well, how does that?
It does for some jobs, yes.
Okay.
And if I actually, I didn't bring any visuals, but we have a chart, I think it's on our website, that shows, and it's almost linear, right? The more school you have, the higher your wages. So, high school degree, minimum wage. You've having a certificate, you've got a little bit above that. An associate's, your wages go up, and then a 4-year and on. It's almost a straight line, right? So, but as long as you've got some sort of post-secondary credential, your opportunity to earn higher wages increases.
Okay. And then, so one of you said access, then afford, right? So then how do they afford, right?
Yeah. So that one is a big one for us. And a couple of things are true. And so again, we're talking about systemic racism and how it manifests in our community. So Georgia is one of 2 states in the entire country that does not offer need-based financial aid to students. So in other states, if you fill out the FAFSA and your parents make under a certain amount of money, the state will provide financial aid through grants so that you can attend one of the, one of the state institutions. In the state of Georgia, we have the Hope Scholarship. And the Hope Scholarship is a merit-based scholarship. So in order to access the Hope Scholarship, which is provided by state funds, students have to graduate with a minimum of a 3.0 GPA in a certain set of classes. So this is not a comprehensive 3.0, right? We're talking about a subset of classes. And then they have to get a certain score on their SAT or ACT to be able to get the Hope Scholarship. When we were starting Achieve Atlanta, we wanted to say, okay, well, how many of our students actually access Hope? And what we found was that only about 30% of students from APS going to college qualified for the Hope Scholarship. So the other 70% were not getting state financial aid. Where does that leave them? If they fill out the FAFSA, most of our students get the Pell Grant, and Pell has actually increased. So if you qualify for the Pell Grant, it's about $6,500 a year towards the cost of college that you get from the federal government. Okay, if you don't get the Hope Scholarship, then you've got to fill the gap with either other scholarships, loans, or by working. The average cost of attendance to attend a public institution in the state of Georgia is a 4-year institution is $20,000 a year. That includes tuition, books, room and board, etc. Okay. So now you've got this $20,000 a year. I've got $6,500 in aid. I have a big gap to fill. And how am I going to fill that gap? So what we did is we did a lot of research. We looked across the country to see what's a viable scholarship program that can help students afford to go to school without having to take out private loans, because we know that those are high interest. Government loans, subsidized loans, those are still a smart, they can be smart debt because, the low interest rates, et cetera. And so we designed our scholarship program, the Achieve Atlanta Scholarship, to basically mimic what we think the state should be doing for students. And so right now, our scholarship, in order to qualify, you fill out your FAFSA. And if you have an estimated family contribution of $8,000 or less, then you qualify for the Achieve Atlanta Scholarship. And we provide $5,000 a year for 4 years. So a $20,000 scholarship to our students who are going to a 4-year institution. And for our students who are going to a technical or a 2-year school, it's $1,500 a year for 2 years. So a total of $3,000. Interestingly enough, and I think, you can sort of decide what this means, but the state does provide financial aid for students who want to go to a 2-year or a technical school. And those costs are lower. And so with the Achieve Atlanta Scholarship and the Hope Grant, which is called, it's not the Hope Scholarship, it's the Hope Grant, and the low cost of a 2-year or technical school, students can't afford to go without having to take out any loans. And then for our students who are going to a 4-year school, our students often have to take out debt or get more scholarships or work to finance their education.
Yeah. I've heard something the other day that the Hope Scholarship goes to people who don't need it, right? It goes to the students whose parents are well off.
Right. And I read an article recently, Kathy, and this just really hurt my heart. There's something called Hope Cars, and car sales went up when the Hope Scholarship was implemented, because what families do is they say to their student going to college, if you go in state of Georgia, I'll buy you a car because you have the Hope Scholarship, and and with the money I was going to pay for college, I'll buy you a car. If you go out of state, then we'll use that money to pay for your college. And so, and then the other phenomenon, and I think a lot of people know this, is the Hope Scholarship is financed through lottery dollars. Well, we know who buys lottery tickets. It's not middle or high income families. So the whole system is really not designed to help the students that we serve.
How sad. The students that we serve, their families who are buying these lottery tickets are paying for the education of people who can't afford it. Right. And who are buying cars for their students. Right. That really is a sad statement.
Yes. And we need to do better. And, the good news is that there are a lot of advocates. The Georgia Budget and Policy Institute has done a ton of research. And if you go on their website, you can find all this data on the Hope Scholarship. They advocate every legislative session for need-based aid. We're part of coalitions that are doing the same thing. We've gotten close, but we're not there yet. And the hope is the hope. The true hope is that, in the next few years, we will see some form of need-based aid for our students in the state of Georgia.
Okay. Wow. So let's talk about the pandemic, right? Because we know that the pandemic changed a lot of things for a lot of students. Had to have changed a significant amount for our students, right? Our communities, right? So before the pandemic, students would get identified, and we didn't talk about how they find you all, but they find you all help them, et cetera. They've gone to college, you help them through college, et cetera. Now we've had a pandemic. They spent at least a year, or maybe longer, not able to physically go to college. What did that do to our students and their interest, ability to go to college?
So the pandemic definitely had a negative impact on our students and on their trajectory, right? So what we saw this across the country, was one of the first things that happened is fewer students are going to college, right? So the students that were in high school, and I've got my daughter's a freshman in college this year. She's an APS graduate, and basically from March of 2020 until she set foot on a college campus in the fall, she was online school. And a lot of high school students, just suffered during that time, right? So luckily my daughter had access to internet and computer and a home, where she could sit in a room and, go to class without a lot of distraction. A lot of our students don't have that, right? And so students really had struggled with online schooling and, just being able to be engaged. Mental health crisis for young people is through the roof. And there's lots of studies coming out about suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety has risen pretty dramatically for young people across the pandemic. And so what we saw across the country and at APS was a drop in college enrollment, right? So students were saying, if I can't go to college in person, I'm going to wait. Or my mom lost her job, my dad lost his job, my grandma lost her job. I need to work to help, support my family. I'm not going to go to school. I'm going to, take a job. And so what we saw was college enrollment go down this last fall. We're happy to say that those numbers are coming back up in terms of number of students filing FAFSAs, applications, et cetera. And in Atlanta, at Atlanta Public Schools, that number didn't drop as precipitously as it did across the country. So we were able to hold on to more students. For our students who did go to college, so they are now going to college, and think about it. In a normal time, you go through high school graduation, you go on a college campus visit, you go through orientation, and there's a lot of rituals that get you mentally and emotionally prepared to make that transition. Now, what did we have? We had one day students are logging on to high school classes, and then a few months later, they're logging on and now they're in college. And there's no sort of change in their physical environment, what they're experiencing. So a lot of our students struggled. And what we saw was that we had more students this last semester stop out after their first semester than we had in the past. We're now engaging in efforts to try to get those students back enrolled in college. And when we reach them and we call them, because we reach out to all of our students, they want to come back. They're just trying to figure out how to do that. Now that colleges, for the most part, are in person and on campus, I think students are starting to have more hope. And again, we're starting to see the numbers tick up in terms of like applications, scholarship applications, et cetera. But it had a tremendous impact on our students. And then the other thing was, again, mental health, the ability to make friends, to engage in college, to join activities. I was on a panel yesterday with the vice president of student support services at Georgia State. And what she pointed out was, we think about academics when we think about college, but college is a developmental experience for students.
It is.
Right? It's, when you're learning to live on your own, you're learning to take care of yourself, you're making choices about your classes, what your future is going to be. And this, our students did not hit that developmental milestone, and so we're trying to figure out ways now to catch them back up so that they can stay on their journey.
And it's interesting. I talked to a Spelman student, and when she went home, right, because of the pandemic, she then was responsible for her siblings' education, right? She had to help them with their school because the parents had to work. Right,
exactly.
So the requirements.
Yes, it is. And a lot of times you have multiple students sharing one device. Or maybe you've got two devices, or students are on their phone because they don't have a computer, right? So these are all, and somehow they are doing it. I mean, if I tell you the stories of our students and how they have their incredible resilience and their drive and their ability to continue even in the face of all of this is amazing.
Yeah.
But it's not sustainable over the long term.
And I know that Achieve Atlanta also can help them. They had emergency grants and things like that to help them, right, during the time of this time to get the equipment that they needed or whatever to be able to go to school. Right? Yeah.
And so one of the things we're really lucky about is that when the pandemic hit, we set up an emergency grant fund pretty quickly, and we're able to give out micro grants to students. First, at the beginning, just to help them come home, right? Because they had to leave their campuses, store their stuff, et cetera. But then after that, to help with getting technology and devices, and then also helping with basic needs. So, food insecurity, housing insecurity. And a lot of times those micro grants, because we're not collecting data on the students who receive those, were the deciding factor on whether or not a student could continue in school.
Wow. Okay. So we have a question in the chat that says, does the recent discussion and legislation about CRT impact APS students, and does it motivate or deflate their aspirations?
CRT impact. I'm not sure what that might be referring to. So if
critical race theory impact APS students, maybe.
Oh, okay, got it. Yes, sorry. I don't think that. I I don't think there's a lot of conversation around it, quite frankly, for our students. And this is what I'll say. I think our students are, these are discussions that I think adults are having around, and a lot of it is like centered around political ideology, et cetera. So I'll share that, as you said in my bio, I'm an attorney. I graduated from Columbia, which is one of the cradles of critical race theory. Critical race theory is actually like a legal scholar concept that is not really ever taught in high schools.
No.
But it's being used as a buzzword to basically replace the idea that we're not going to teach about Cesar Chavez and Martin Luther King and slavery. And that's not critical race theory, that's history. Right. And so, but we've created these buzzwords that now politicians are glomming onto to create these like discussions. Our students are focused on learning, on being engaged in class, on seeing their friends, on trying to have, a quote unquote normal experience in high school. Now, so the things that are motivating or demotivating our students are whether or not they have somebody who cares about them, whether they're connected to friends, whether they feel part of a community. To the extent that they are not seeing themselves in the curriculum and in history, right? So if I'm learning about the history of the United States and I don't see anybody there that looks like me, I don't see women represented, I don't see Latinos represented, then yes, that is demotivating. But I think that's happening at a much more sort of like personal and experiential level than because of these conversations that adults are having, outside of the school building.
Right. So you are now seeing some graduates, right? You got people gone through your program that you all supported all the way through college, and you're now seeing graduates. And so, what are you seeing? What's going on with them? What kind of jobs are they getting, or what's happening with those students?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of great things. We're very excited, and if you follow us on Instagram, we're always posting pictures and updates about our students who are graduating. And I think at this point, we've got over 600 graduates, which we're super, super proud about with our students. And, they're getting jobs, they're going on to graduate school, and we've seen a lot of great things. But one of the things that we're now going to be focusing on, Kathy, is how do we actually help our students get strong first jobs? So back to this issue of systemic racism, right, and inequity. There's an organization called Braven that works to support students who are going into the workforce. And they're actually working with the entire sophomore class at Spelman. And they've done a lot of research that found that a student who got a Pell Grant in college, once they get into the workforce, is typically making 66 cents on the dollar to their peer who graduated from the same institution, but from a higher income family, right? Okay, so now what, right? We thought that getting a degree was going to be the great equalizer, but we know there's still a wealth gap, right, in this country. And so why is that? A lot of that is around social capital. So when we think about how do you get those jobs, you get internships, during your college experience. How do you get those internships? Somebody, tells you about the program, the consulting internship, or the investment banking internship, et cetera, right? And somehow you get connected to those. The other thing is, how do we all get jobs? We call people we know, we say, hey, I'm looking, my daughter's coming out of college with a degree in finance and she's looking, here's her resume. Like this is how the world works. This is how our country works, right? And low income students, even though they've been able to navigate through college and get their degree, they don't have the same access to social capital that other students do. So what we are focusing now is how do we actually help support our students so that they can land that strong first job through things like connecting them to internships and then helping them with their interview skills, their networking skills, so that once they're looking for a job, they know how to navigate that process as well. And so we're going to be instituting a pilot this year, again, with some grant funding that we got from a couple of national organizations to work with Braven, to work with a couple of colleges and universities and a subset of our graduates to help put them through these programs so that they can get connected to a strong first job. And when we see what works, then we want to scale that to all of the graduates across Achieve Atlanta. Because at the end of the day, we focus on post-secondary degree attainment and workforce, but our ultimate goal is economic opportunity,
Right.
right? And social mobility.
Right.
And so, you know, we have more work to do if we're going to reach our vision.
Right. That's amazing. I mean, so you first engage with them in high school, and then you carry that all the way through to get them to that first job.
Right.
Which is an amazing support system for a student, right? That has had no support all of this time, right?
Right.
That is phenomenal. Now, how many students do you impact in a year?
Oh gosh. Well, before I answer that question, I'll just tell you, we've actually hired our first Achieve Atlanta graduate. As a social media person on our team, I don't even know the right term because that's how old I am, you know, but this is great for us because we're now starting to see our students, and they intern for us and they're working for us. And so we're super excited about that. So how many students do we serve a year? So at the high school level, Achieve Atlanta touches every junior and senior. And so I would say it's probably about 5,000 to 6,000 students a year in high school. And then we currently have funded close to 4,000 college students. So, you know, I would say give or take about 10,000 students a year.
That's amazing. And you have a small staff. I mean, you know,
we do.
You do a lot with a very few people. So that's fantastic. Yeah.
But we believe in the power of partnerships. And so, you know, our staff right now is 16 full-time staff members, 16, but we work with lots of nonprofit partners, APS, higher ed, et cetera. And that's where our secret sauce is, right? Like we're conveners, facilitators, connectors, and, you know, we try to do the work to sort of give everybody a bird's eye picture and let them know like where they're going to plug in and really try to set a collective vision that we're all working towards.
Which is what your funders wanted you to do.
Yeah, exactly.
So what keeps you up at night? What do you worry about?
Oh gosh, I'm worried about what we started talking about, Kathy, right? Is that the bar always gets raised or moved or shifted. And, you know, we're doing the best that we can, but we seem to always be playing catch up.
Right.
And I want to figure out a way that when the next disruption happens, that we're part of whatever that strategy is, right? So pre-pandemic, and I think it's still happening right now, right? Some of the things that are happening, the coding boot camps, the independent credentialing organizations, the way that workforce is credentialing people, training people, et cetera. You know, if it's good for some, it needs to be good for all. And so, you know, I think we've got to keep an eye on what's happening. I'll give you one quick example. During COVID, a lot of schools went test optional, meaning they don't need SATs or ACTs, right? That can be a really good thing if it's implemented in the right way. But if it's not, then now what? Now you're working on getting in because you have an excellent essay or because you've been in these amazing extracurriculars, which, you know, a lot of times our students can't participate in.
Right. They're working and they've got all kinds of other things going on, taking care of their siblings. Yeah.
Or they're in a school with a counselor that's serving 400 students who can't help you the way an independent coach can on your essays, right? So we're always looking around the corner around like what's the next thing that's going to happen that's going to leave our students out. And so it's not one thing in particular, but, you know, I spend a lot of my time just looking at trends, reading about disruptions, like, you know, what are some of the emerging things that are happening in workforce and higher ed. I believe in education as a liberating, like, I believe in the liberatory power of education, right? Once you know who you are and where you come from, like nobody can take that from you. But there's a very practical side to this, right? Which is I need to work and I need to support my family. And so, you know, you sort of have to balance those two things in the work that we do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always amazed at how optimistic you are in face of everything else that you've got going on and all the things that you see, because you maintain that amazing level of optimism and that inspires our students. So I've always appreciated that about you.
Well, I appreciate that. And honestly, it's the students that give us the optimism, because as soon as you sit down and talk to them, they're brilliant, they're creative, they're problem solvers. Like, I don't want to hear anybody talk about how our students don't have grit, because our students have survived things that most people could not. And so that's where the inspiration comes from.
Yeah. just the things we ask them to do to try to get ahead are
Right,
so daunting, right? That most people couldn't do them, but our students figure out how to do it and how to get good
right.
with your help, of course. So this group, what would you tell us if someone would say, what could we do? What should we do to help?
Yeah.
How could we lend our help?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, this group lives in Atlanta and in Georgia and are voters. So, these issues matter. They matter for our kids, but they matter for our workforce. So keep an eye out on what's happening at the legislature and, think about what policies can help support students all across, the spectrum. The second thing I would say is that if you want to get involved with Achieve Atlanta directly, we do have an emergency grant fund where, we have micro grants that we give to students, and those micro grants are $500, and every little bit counts. So if you want to go on our website, we've got a donate link. We're always happy to, and the good thing about our emergency grant fund is that 100% of those donations go to students. So they're directly going to students. They're not going to pay my salary. Luckily, we've got, funders for that. So if you want to get involved in supporting a student, you can do that. And then follow us we're very active on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Achieve Atlanta. You can see our students, you can see inspiring stories. You can, stay connected to the work that we're doing. And our students have a t-shirt that says believe, expect, achieve. And when I'm out and about, I see that t-shirt all the time. So if you ever see one,
Nice.
Tell a student that you're excited for them and for the work that they're doing.
Oh, that's fantastic. So Tina, thank you so much for joining us tonight and for sharing the Achieve Atlanta mission and with our alums. When you all approached me, you and Yum, your board chair, approached me about this, I didn't know anything about Achieve Atlanta. So my guess is that there are many others that don't know anything about Achieve Atlanta as well. But thanks to tonight, we got more that know, and then we will, through the video, be able to share this with others so that we increase the number of people who know and have an interest to help with the legislation and help with your grants, et cetera. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Kathy.
Yeah, and thank you all this evening for joining us. And we hope to see you on a future discussion. So thank you very much.